You wowie.
Last weekend, the Investigation Discovery Channel released a two-part documentary called Quiet on Set: The Dark Side of Kids TV. What the documentary was about is that it basically had adults who were once childhood actors on Nickelodeon speak out against the hostile work environment that was present during their time on Nickelodeon. The people who spoke out were Leon Frierson, Brian Hearn, Katrina Johnson, Giovanni Samuels, and Kyle Sullivan, all people who were on the children's sketch show All That. Some examples of the hostile conditions they endured were when Brian spoke out saying he felt uncomfortable having to wear a skin-tight suit for some of the sketches on the show, as well as expressing his dislike of being covered in peanut butter and having dogs lick him clean as a punishment on the Snick on Air Dare sketch. Or how Dan Schneider told Katrina Johnson's parents that she was getting fat and having to deal with the hardship of being outright replaced with another woman named Amanda Bynes, who also ended up having a rough transition into adulthood. Not to mention that Schneider also filled Katrina's heads with empty promises about her getting her own show. Even the adults who were working on the show also experienced a hostile work environment, as there were two women writers on All That, Chrissy Stratton and Jenny Kilgan, who were horribly mistreated by Dan Schneider. Examples of this include Dan having the two women share a salary while the men got paid full salaries, and Dan did this because he said that women aren't funny. And when one of them reported to the union about how it's illegal for writers to share salaries, Dan threatened to blacklist her from Hollywood if she came out to him for reporting it. Dan also forced them to read messages that he sent to them out loud. Dan said that it was to bring humor to the office, as they initially said random words like hammers, but became increasingly degrading with words like idiot and slut. If they refused to say it out loud, Dan will resend it to them in all caps until they eventually said that word. One more thing was that Dan had these women work long hours and even fired one of them just because she had friends over to her place in her spare time. The other woman ended up quitting because she couldn't take the hostile conditions anymore. What's worse is that Dan wasn't the only toxic member on the All That staff. There was a man named Jason Michael Handy who developed feelings for this young girl actor named Brandy. One instance occurred where Jason and Brandy were playing in Brandy's room, and Jason started giving her unwanted kisses and even tried to make a move by undressing her. Jason tried to play it off by saying to her, "Don't tell your parents." It got even weirder when Jason sent Brandy an email of a video of him butt naked masturbating while telling Brandy that he's thinking of her. When Jason ended up getting arrested, it was revealed that Jason had massive amounts of child pornography on his computer and had little Ziploc bags with girls' names on them, and each bag contained perverted memorabilia items like used panties. He even wrote in a diary that he had fantasies of having sex with little girls. There was also another man named Brian Peck, who, might I add, is not related to Josh Peck in any way. Brian was a dialogue coach and actor on The Amanda Show, where he played the character Pickle Boy, who fed the staff members and crew pickles. You can already get a perverted angle from his character, but it gets even worse when there was this one scene where a man was trapped in a bathroom saying that he was hungry, and Pickle Boy slides a pickle through a little hole in the bathroom door, which is obviously a glory hole joke, where the man proceeds to eat the pickle while making moaning sounds. One of the cast members on All That, Kyle Sullivan, remembered one instance where Brian invited the All That cast members and their parents to his house for a party, and Kyle spotted this weird painting of a clown in his garage, only for Brian to reveal that it was a painting of notorious serial killer John Wayne Gacy, and even admitted that he wrote letters to him while he was in prison. Even though Brian Peck didn't kill any kids, he did, unfortunately, molest a child, which leads me to the bombshell that was dropped in this documentary. On the second night of this two-night special documentary, Drake Bell finally revealed to the public that he was the sexual assault victim of Brian Peck back in 2003. Drake's story begins by revealing that his parents had divorced when he was only 5 years old, and his father, Joe Bell, was able to get him into acting, which the two ended up using as a bonding experience. Drake mentioned that every day after school, his dad would pick him up, where they would then travel from Orange County to Burbank for his acting career. Drake started his acting career in television commercials for commercials like Whirlpool Appliances and Pokemon Red and Blue. He also had minor television appearances on shows like Home Improvement and Seinfeld. He even appeared in the 1996 film Jerry Maguire. His first starring role was on The Amanda Show in 1999. While working on The Amanda Show, Drake ended up working closely with Brian Peck. Joe, on the other hand, started to grow very suspicious of Brian, not only because of how much time he was spending around Drake, but also he noticed him getting a little touchy-feely with his own son. When Joe expressed his discomfort with some of the Amanda Show crew with how touchy Brian is with Drake, they were being overly apologetic for his actions, such as saying, "Oh, he's gay, you're just homophobic," or "He's always like this." Brian tried to be as big of a part in Drake's life as possible. He would invite Drake over to his house for coaching lessons, though his dad was with him during those moments. He would attend Drake's concerts, and he would even treat him to visits to Disneyland, which was a place he loved going to as a kid. Brian knew that Drake's father was starting to grow suspicious of him being so close to Drake, and because of this, he tried to manipulate Drake into thinking that he was more important to him than his dad. And sadly, the manipulation ended up working, since Drake ended up telling his dad that he no longer wants to have him as his coach anymore. Drake recalled how devastated his dad was when he broke the news to him, and even said that it felt like his dad was going through his divorce all over again. Drake then started living with his mom after the incident, but Joe warned her that he stays as far away from Brian as possible. However, Brian knew that Drake's parents weren't very close to each other, and since his mom didn't feel like driving him from Orange County to Hollywood, Brian ended up becoming his chauffeur from work and back. There were some instances where Drake ended up spending the night at Brian's place, and at first, nothing messed up happened during those nights. But there was one night where Brian ended up getting Drake. One morning, Drake woke up only to realize that he had been completely violated by Brian Peck. Drake said that he was completely speechless when this happened, and he didn't know what to say or do next. Brian took advantage of this and began to repeatedly assault him. These incidents happened during the downtime between the ending of The Amanda Show and the filming for the pilot of Drake and Josh, Dan Schneider's next big show. During that time, Drake got a girlfriend and ended up spending the nights at her place rather than Brian's, because he said he felt safer there, and for obvious reasons. Brian wasn't just going to give up there, because Brian kept calling Drake non-stop when he was at his girlfriend's house. Eventually, the mother of Drake's girlfriend grew suspicious of this and pulled Drake to the side to have a conversation with him in private to ask if everything was okay, and said that it makes absolutely no sense for this middle-aged man to be repeatedly calling this 15-year-old boy non-stop. Brian's persistence also affected Drake at work, since he asked Drake if he could get Dan Schneider to get him to play the father on Drake and Josh, to which Drake ended up refusing. It ended up getting to the point where Drake and his mom organized a police sting where Drake went by the anonymous name John Doe, that resulted in Brian finally getting arrested. You think that with Brian getting arrested, that would be the end of that, but it gets more messed up from there. When Drake and Brian were in court for Brian sexually assaulting him, Drake noticed that Brian had a lot of support on his side of the court. As many as 40 Hollywood figures wrote letters to the presiding judge in support of Peck. These names included the actors James Marsden, Kimmy Robertson, Taran Killam, Alan Thicke, Joanna Kearns, Ryder Strong, and Will Friedle. And interestingly, Dan Schneider did not write a support letter to Brian. Peck was convicted of 2 counts and was sentenced to serve 16 months in prison and got registered as a sex offender. After his release, he was hired to work on the Disney Channel teen sitcom, The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. He did voiceover work for 3 episodes, but was later fired after Disney Channel executives learned of his conviction, and his voice lines and on-screen credits were replaced. Luckily, he was never on set nor interacted with the show's cast or crew, and Brian has not worked in the entertainment industry since 2019. While Drake and his family are revealed that they don't have to deal with Brian anymore, the trauma that Drake endured stayed with him and ended up leading him down a self-destructive path. As for what I thought about this documentary, I found it to be very informative. It's pretty much been well known that Dan Schneider had a pervy angle to him, but this documentary just shows that Dan wasn't the only problem at Nickelodeon during that time. I chose to put more of an emphasis on Drake Bell's story, not only because it's by far the saddest, but Drake's story pretty much covers all of the problems of working with Dan Schneider that all these other child stars and staff had during their time at Nickelodeon. Such as how families were torn apart from working at Nickelodeon. Aside from Drake's relationship with his father being torn apart, one child star in all that blamed his mom as the reason for him getting fired from Nickelodeon, since she was very outspoken and critical of the skits and roles that her child had to play on all that. It also shows how much power and leverage these adult entertainment veterans had over these innocent children, such as how Drake chose to have his name anonymous in the Brian Peck trial out of fear that his career would be over if he did speak out. What's also very shocking about this is if you rewatch episodes of Drake and Josh, you would have never guessed that Drake was going through a really tough time in his personal life. It almost felt like Drake and Josh was an escape for him during those years, and once Drake and Josh ended, he turned to unhealthy coping mechanisms like excessive drinking and drug usage. If you're wondering, there is kind of a happy ending to this, as Drake mentioned that he recently sought out therapy for the trauma he endured long ago, and he feels relieved to be in an environment where people genuinely want him to get better. There was also this very heartwarming part in the document where Drake was walking out with his dad, where his dad says, "Better days are ahead of us," to which Drake says, "I keep hearing that." To which his dad responds, "Well, start listening to it," which I found to be very touching. Again, if you want to watch the documentary Quiet on Set, it's available to watch on the streaming platforms Max and Discovery Plus, and I would highly recommend watching it. Well, unless you're faint of heart, for which I'll have to give a warning for that. If you're someone who loved these live-action Nickelodeon shows growing up, you can still like them. It's all about separating the art from the artist, since there are many people who still love Ren and Stimpy, even though it's universally known that John K. is a disgusting human being. Anyways, that's all I have for today, and I'll see you next time.